Hello and welcome to episode 95 of our podcast, Two Chairs Talking. My name is David Grigg and I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Perry Middlemiss. Now, Perry, I understand that someone rather stitched you up.
Yes, David, they could say that. That is part of the reason why we're probably running a few days later than we would normally schedule, about a week later. I have had a bit of skin treatment after visiting a dermatologist who told me that I had a few basal cell skin cancers. So these are the base level skin cancers that you get, mainly a product of who I am and where I grew up in the 50s and 60s in Australia. Not enough sunburn cream, not enough attention to sun damage, and that's now come back to haunt me. So I've had 3 little spots taken off, all stitched up, all fine, nothing further other than base level basal skin cell removal. And biopsies came back and they were all clear, so that's good.
No,
I'm happy about that.
Very good.
So, but the she seemed to keep on pumping a hell of a lot of local anaesthetic into my back to get this one off the back. And my wife tells me it's quite a large scar. So I think that I was a bit, when I got off the table, because it was all local anaesthetics, when I got up off the table I was a bit woozy, so I had to sit down for a while. And so I'm glad that she was there so she could drive me home, and I didn't have to worry about it. But it sort of made me feel a bit odd and a bit off for 2 or 3 days, which was a bit strange. Not really bad. I was able to do most things, but every now and again you get there and go, oh, you know, I'm fairly lethargic and don't really feel all that flash. So that, you know, plus a visitor that we had for a week, sort of threw us off for a little bit. But anyway, here we are, back and bright and cheerful as usual, David.
Jolly good.
Happy. So you won't have these problems, having come from that sun-deprived northern hemisphere.
Yeah, so sort of
as you did as a kid.
Pale skin sort of kid. Yeah, I went to see a dermatologist years and years and years ago, and they sort of checked me out, and I took my shirt off, and he took one look at my back and said, "You didn't grow up in Australia, did you?" No, I didn't.
No, bleedingly
so I
obvious.
didn't have any problems there. Yeah.
Yes,
so
well,
there you go.
Yes, well, I have a fair amount of skin damage. I knew that it was going to be coming up because it's in the family. My father had a couple of skin cancers off, the same thing, basal cells, and my brother's had a couple off as well, and he's a couple of years older than me. So basically it was on the cards, and I just knew that I was going to get it. I don't have the problem around the ears so much, though oddly enough, there was a very tiny one behind the back of the ear, which I found a bit strange, but that must have again been from damage caused, 40, 50 odd years ago. My wife had a look at it and said she could barely see it, so it was tiny, but better for it to be gone. Given that you and I, David, are what might be referred to as follicularly challenged up top. I've been wearing
bald. I think is this.
Well, that's the other way of looking at it. But I'm, there's the old line about grass doesn't grow on a hot roof, and sort of.
We use all those excuses, but
you're not losing your hair. You're not losing
bald.
hair. You're just gaining face, David.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
I've heard all the excuses.
Yeah, that's all right. But it's just
I'm just gracefully going bald.
I'm just gracefully going bald as well. So I've been wearing a wide-brimmed hat for the last 30 odd years, and so that's basically saved the top of my ears, but. And my scalp, but not necessarily other parts of the body, which got all of its damage caused, as I said, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, when you were younger. Yeah.
There we are.
Oh, well, let's roll on.
Well, it's, we just time marches, David. It just keeps on trucking down that road, and things that you think you might have steered clear of suddenly sort of jump out of the bushes and go, here I am, and there you are. You're in a bit of trouble. So we just got to put up with it, really.
We do.
Not much we can do. Yeah.
All right. What about news in the rest of the world, Perry? Is there anything going on?
News in the rest of the world. We're only a couple of months away from this year's Worldcon, and so the Hugo Awards voter pack is now available, although I haven't yet downloaded it, and a friend of the podcast, Rose Mitchell, who has given me details about how to do so, tells me that it is quite complicated and is not an obvious thing that you would be able to track down. So she's had to cobble together the instructions from a few Fairnish websites. I've asked her to supply them to me, which she has now done, because I can download things because I am a member. As you recall from previous years, David, this is going to give us a selection of the Hugo Award nominees for us to be able to read as members of the convention. And the aim then is that we should keep it to ourselves, or maybe supply it for review purposes only, but not to upload it to anywhere, and I certainly won't be doing that. So I'll just be reading the stuff as I can after I've downloaded it. But as I spoke a couple of last episode or the episode before, I'm not going to work my way through the novels this year. It looks like a very uninviting,
fairly ordinary,
sort of list, and I'll just wait to see what comes out on top. I'm sort of I've got my preference for one or two of them based on the works that I've read by those authors previously. And I'm sort of hoping that they will come through, which will be good. But there are a couple there where I think for what I've read of them and read the reviews of them, I sort of think,
no, they don't appeal to me.
No, they just don't appeal. Anyway, so that's just the way that it goes. And I think it's just, there's a heck of a lot of this cozy fiction being written that is referred to as hope punk in the SF genre. And yes, it might make you feel good, but really there's not much in the way of drama. And I think that stories have got to have a story. They can't just start at one place and just go to the end and stop. I mean, I can figure that out by walking down the street. I don't really want to do that. So I'm not learning anything from any of these things, and I'm finding them, a lot of these stories, instantly forgettable. So, but we shall see. I'll have a look and see how we go. As we've said in the past, especially in the short story category, you and I, when we've read them in the past, have said there's always one or two that just stands out straight away. The rest of them is like, so, but the one or two at the top really stand out for whatever reason. And, they're the ones that you go looking for, and they're the things that we're after. Commensurately with the Hugo Awards packet is the site selection for the 2025 Worldcon, which is now open. This allows members of the current convention to vote for the site for the Worldcon for 2 years' time. So this will be for 2025. At this point, the only city that's on the ballot is Seattle from Washington State, the United States of America, although write-ins are allowed. I shall make a point right here and now that if anybody writes in Melbourne, I'm leaving, and I'll probably move to New Zealand, I think, and go and spend a bit of time there.
Yes, very.
Because I'm certainly not going to have anything more to do with any others. I've done my dash and not doing it again.
I mean, neither.
No, I don't think you're going to do it either. So
no,
I think we're fine. And that idea is that the great Fairnish line of friends don't let friends run Worldcons. We have to. I now have to tell everybody that they are they should not allow me to even act as any sort of capacity. I'm not interested. It's just I've done my dash. It's too hard, and I'm not doing it again. And this time I would really make lots of enemies, I think, because I would. I don't suffer the volunteers as much as I used to. How about that? So there we go. Right. The last thing. Yes, the last thing. Oh, should remember this one, David. The Ditmar Award ballot is out. Now,
the
Ditmars are back. Yeah, we haven't mentioned them for ages. This is the Australian Science Fiction Achievement Awards, otherwise known as the Ditmar Awards, and these are the ones that are handed out each year, voted on and handed out each year at the National Science Fiction Convention. This year's National NatCon is going to be held in Canberra at the beginning of October, and the Ditmar Awards ballots are out. And there's a bit of news, David. You and I are both on it.
Oh, yes. Fools, those voters are.
We've both been nominated for Best Fan Writer, David. How about that?
Very strange. Very strange.
Very strange. Well,
never mind. Well, thank you to the voters.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, the even stranger thing about this is that there are 4 people on the ballot for Best Fan Writer, and those people are Kat Clay, who I don't know personally, Bruce Gillespie, friend of the podcast, and you and I. So 3 old farts and a young person.
New and fresh.
Yeah, well, I think it'll probably be the new and fresh person. But but then Bruce has won more than his fair share of Best Fan Writer awards.
No, that's not so. He has deservedly won many awards.
He's won more than his fair share.
He has won a lot of awards.
Look, I'm only having he knows that I'm only having a joke. He's been a stalwart in fan writing in Australia and in world terms. Yeah. I think it's a travesty that he's never won for either himself or for science fiction commentary a Hugo Award. But
sure.
There we are.
Absolutely.
Tried to get him on every bloody year, but he doesn't seem to go there. And I think his time has passed because it's all moved on to electronic stuff.
Yeah.
And I won a Best Fan Writer award in 1988, David.
Yeah, well done.
35 years ago. So it's either your turn or Kat's turn. There you go.
Let's go with the younger generation.
Oh, right. Okay. You. All right. Okay. You're going to pass it by, are you?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Let you go just this once then. All right. So that's it. That's really basic my news. There's probably other stuff. We seem to have moved away from all of the awards that were coming out in a big rapid rush. I think they finally got to the point mid-year where finally most of them, or at least the ballots, have been announced. We've still got the results to come, of course, but I'm not seeing too many more awards ballots that we're particularly interested in coming out. Might have to start looking at some of the other genres like crime soon, David. But unfortunately,
the Ned Kelly ballot was out a while ago.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was out. And soon, coming up soon, you'll have some of the other crime ones. I never keep track of them. As
David Award? Yeah, I haven't seen the David Award lists yet.
No, that's true. No, we haven't seen that. But also the international ones as well. I think the crime writer. The CWA Dagger Awards, those ballots are out, or the shortlists are out, but the awards haven't been announced as yet. There didn't seem to be any major Australian writers on the lists this year. So, but we'll still keep an eye on it and see how we go.
Indeed.
If that information comes up, we shall impart it to the listener.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's talk about what we've been reading, and I'm going to say reading and watching because you want to talk about a couple of films
Yes,
too.
I do want to talk about a couple of films. Yep.
All right, so let's start. Shall I start?
Yeah,
I'll start with the book.
You kick us off. I've been talking quite long enough.
Okay.
As usual.
That's all right. All right, so I'm going to talk about Red Notice by Bill Browder. Now, this is a work of non-fiction. It's a true story, but it ends up reading like, John le Carré at his best, and with good reason. So it starts off really largely as a work of autobiography. So in the early parts of the book, Bill Browder tells of his upbringing in a strongly socialist-leaning family in the United States. His father, I take that back, his grandfather, Earl Browder, was a prominent communist activist who became the General Secretary of the American Communist Party during the 1930s. And during the McCarthy era, when there was the whole Red Scare thing, he was grilled for days on end by the US Congress. And Bill Browder's father, Felix Browder, was born in Moscow. And after Earl Browder returned to America from having lived in Russia for some time, Felix Browder became a top-ranked mathematician, as did Felix's brothers, though not without some initial difficulty of getting placed in universities because of the notoriety of his communist father. Anyway, this strain of high-achieving intellectualism was passed down through the family. And Bill Browder's older brother, in fact, is a particle physicist. However, as Bill Browder tells it, he was sort of rebelling against the rest of the family And he broke away from this socialist and academic tradition and decided that he was going to become a capitalist, which indeed he did. And it's quite an interesting career story he tells, but without going into any great detail, which is, you should read the book. He eventually set up an investment fund to invest in Eastern Europe and in Russia. And this fund, the Heritage Fund, eventually became the world's single largest investor in Russia during the 1990s, acquiring more than $4.5 billion in assets. Now, in running this fund, in essay largely focused on Russia, Browder came up against some of Russia's oligarchs and the deeply entrenched corruption that was making them rich. So, using every available means at his disposal, every available legal means at his disposal, Browder fought back against these oligarchs and managed to defeat them and get them into difficulties. A move which was initially supported by Russia's new leader, Vladimir Putin. But after one prominent oligarch was tried and put in prison, Putin was able to use the threat of this against the other oligarchs to start funneling some of their profits his way. Basically, Browder says there was a deal done. Putin got all these rich guys together in a room and pointed to the guy who'd ended up in prison and said, "If you don't want to end up that way, I want X percentage of your profits." Could have been 50%, 30%, whatever. Anyway, whether that's totally true, I don't know. But anyway, after that, then of course Bill Browder's activism against these corrupt rich people became very unwelcome because Putin was getting some of their profits. And so in 2005, Browder was deported and banned from Russia for life, and furthermore declared to be a threat to Russia's national security. Now, what followed his expulsion makes for quite a complicated story, but Browder manages to tell it very clearly and very well. I'm not going to try to do anywhere near as good a job as that. I couldn't do as good a job as that. So let me simply say that the levels of corruption and blatant disregard of law, ethics, and even humanity in Russia under Putin are quite staggering. Browder's lawyers and associates in Russia came under severe threat after Browder's group began to expose, or continue to expose, some of this corruption. And several of his lawyers had to flee the country. But one young lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, refused to leave Russia because he felt he'd done nothing wrong, and in fact that he'd been involved in exposing a huge fraud on the Russian people. But for that, he was arrested and jailed. During his time in jail, he was very badly treated, quite possibly poisoned, fell seriously ill and was denied any medical treatment, all the time while refusing to sign the false confessions which were put before him. Eventually, under the pretext of taking him to hospital, he was thrown into a cellar and literally beaten to death. Now, shocked, outraged, and full of guilt over Magnitsky's death, Bill Browder took up the cause of activism against Putin's Russia to such an extent that his business affairs declined and were passed into other hands. He was eventually able to lobby members of the US Congress to pass a law to sanction those Russian officials and oligarchs who were involved in Magnitsky's death, ban them from travel to the US, and freeze their assets. This law, now known as the Magnitsky Act, was signed into law by President Obama in 2012, infuriating Putin. And since then, Browder has continued his activism and pushed to have several other Western nations pass Magnitsky Acts of their own, I think including Canada. All of this, of course, made Browder deeply hated by Putin and his cronies, and there's no doubt that he must be high on Putin's hit list. And we know what happens to people who are high on Putin's hit list, don't we? And he's therefore had to take very serious steps to protect his security and that of his family. I believe that Browder's follow-up book, Freezing Order, talks a good deal about this, and I'm going to try and track that one down. Look, I thought this was a great read, very well written. The early parts of the book make it clear that Browder is no kind of saint. He definitely was a filthy capitalist. In fact, for a while, became very rich by his involvement in Russian investment. And it's quite eye-opening about how the very rich live and the people he was associating with and how they sort of live. But his actions since the death of Sergei Magnitsky are, to my eyes at least, highly praiseworthy. At the very least, his exposure of the depths of brazen corruption in today's Russia are very important to do, so to know about. So yeah, highly recommended. Really gripping read.
Okay.
But it's all true.
That's interesting because there's going to be a few connections between what you said earlier about what happened with his grandfather, and I assume his father as well, and a little film that I'm going to be talking about a bit later on today. So,
oh yes, indeed, there's good connection to that.
We'll get some connections going there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, well, my first piece of work that I'm going to be looking at is a science fiction novel set, David, in Melbourne, Victoria.
Excellent.
And very rare. We don't normally get very much of this. I was looking just recently at on Wikipedia at Rob Duran's 2004 anthology of the best science fiction from the last 50 years from Australian science fiction, and looking at some of the reviews of it, and some of them sort of faint criticisms of the anthology by stating that very few, if any, of the stories there were actually set in or concerned Australia at all. Now, I'd go with the idea that the previous writers in the field in the 40s, 50s and 60s basically didn't have a homegrown market for their science fiction, so they had to try and sell it overseas. And if you're going to try and sell something overseas, you have to make it applicable to the readers that are going to be reading it in those overseas markets. Australia is a bit too much of an exotic country that a lot of people may not necessarily want to read about. They want to read about universal themes, or they want to read about stuff that's set either in the UK or the US. And so that a lot of the work from the 50s and 60s would have been set in and around universal themes. I mean, I suppose the major one that you could talk about that wrote science fiction that was in a sort of quasi-Australia was Cordwainer Smith with his old North Australia and with his old North Australia stories, but they were of a form that it was sort of a fantastical representation of the place rather than a realistic representation.
They were almost a satire in Australia, weren't they, really?
Yeah, they are. Well, they were basically satires of the squattocracy in terms of how people made massive amounts of money in the 1800s by having pastoral leases that they paid practically nothing for, and probably didn't pay any taxes, and spent half their time killing off the native population and doing whatever the bloody hell they wanted and running rampant and making massive amounts of money. But anyway, that's another story. The squattocracy is something that we could basically get stuck into at some other point down the track. But it's interesting to read a science fiction novel set in Melbourne. Now, this starts in the year 2080. Now, the whole of the world at this stage is basically is complete and utter mess. So climate change has rendered most of the places uninhabitable during the day, or during parts of the day. The air is polluted, the water's toxic, most plant life in the wild is dead. The Great Barrier Reef is just completely gone, and there are a few animals or birds in evidence. Although I was really quite interested to read just a little bit of a note right near the end of the book where the main character is out away from the cities, out in the bush, and a couple of pink birds fly past. And I thought that was a really nice reference to galahs, and just gives me and reminded me that those galahs really are as tough as old boots, and they'll just last through anything, David. And so that was really interesting. Anyway, the two main characters in this particular book are called, hopefully I get the pronunciation right here, Tao E and Navin. Now, these are female and male. Now, these two have been spending increasing amounts of times in a simulated reality matrix that is available to everybody. So it's just basically like a high-level reality matrix on the internet. But have now decided to upgrade to the new Gaia matrix and purchased these new pods, which are submersive full body pods that allow the user to stay inside the matrix for extended periods of time, basically giving them sustenance and looking after all their bodily wastes all in one go. So this novel really is a novel of the transition period, singularity, if you like, between part-time meat space, if you want to call it that, and full-time simulated reality existence. And the question it asks is, if you could give up your flesh and bone body for a complete uploaded virtual existence, would you? Now, a lot of us who probably might be near the end of our lives might go, it's probably not a bad idea. I could probably be persuaded of this. But the answer always for everybody, of course, is, well, it depends. Mm-hmm. It depends on what you're doing, what your circumstances are, what your long-term life goals are, and where you actually sit. Anyway, and it's interesting that this particular novel looks at it from both sides and gives two different forms, two different answers for two different reasons. Now, Tai is a Malaysian Australian and a partner to Veen, who's originally from the United States. He arrived in Melbourne to meet Tai because they had been marked as extremely compatible in an internet survey of people looking like a Tinder arrangement where you're looking for your perfect partner, and these two were like 99% compatible. And he decides to come to Australia to meet her because it only takes 4 hours, David, to get from San Francisco to Melbourne, which is good. But when he gets here, he finds out that he's really going to... Well, he sort of knew that he had bad kidneys and he was going to need a kidney transplant. And he knows how bad at this point, in 2080, the medical system in the US is and how expensive it is. And he finds out that he can get it all done on a much better basis using better equipment and much cheaper if he stays in Australia. So he decides to stay and the two of them hook up together. Now, the two of them are both ardent users of the simulated reality options. And so they both take up these new pods. But there's a marked difference in the way the two of them actually experience this, with Naveen spending large amounts of time, days at a time, inside the pods, whereas Tai flits in and out because she's still got an ageing mother living in Melbourne and wants to go and basically look after her from time to time. And then, short way down the track after these new pods have been set up, they hear about an upgrade to the Gaia matrix, which allows a person to be completely and fully uploaded into this virtual reality, making their flesh and bone bodies completely useless and actually having them disposed of because they're now no longer required. Naveen, who's always had a little bit of trouble with this kidney transplant, even though he got the best treatment he possibly could, he's still having to undergo ongoing treatment all the time, and it's getting more and more invasive and more difficult for him to do. He makes an automatic decision that, yes, he's going to jump into this new uploaded reality, and you can understand why he would do that. I mean, basically, here it is, somebody says, you've been struggling, you've been sick for a long period of time, you're going to continue to be sick, you're actually going to get sicker until it gets to the stage where it completely debilitates you, or you can move into a simulated reality which to all intents and purposes looks exactly like reality outside, and you're going to be immortal. He just goes, yep, got to do that, no problem. Taoyi, on the other hand, still has a mother around and has other thoughts and other commitments. And so she decides that she's got to put it off. She continually keeps on telling him she's going to be putting off, but you know as a reader that really she's really ambivalent about it and really not terribly sure about what's going to be happening. Now, this new treatment is relatively cheap, and that struck me as being a little bit of an anomaly. I mean, $10,000 for this, I would have thought they'd be ripping people off blind as much as they possibly could. But it soon becomes available widely around the world, and soon everybody is being uploaded, to the extent that some years after this starts, not terribly sure how long, but a couple of years afterwards, The world's population has dwindled to about 1.7 million people. That's not billion, million, with only about 5,000 or so living naturally in Australia. Now, this, of course, means that the world's coming to an absolute grinding halt. Supplies are dwindling, infrastructure is collapsing, and transport is failing. And the only thing that's keeping everything going are the basically automated machines that keep on things running. This is a really interesting setup and a really interesting view of how this part of the singularity would actually work and what impact it would have on the individuals, but also on the wider community. And it strikes me that any author could look at this in terms of two particular different ways. They could either do it at the macro level or the micro level. You could look at it at the top level and look at it as in terms of policy and how it's impacting the world and how everything's collapsing and look at all of that. Or you could go down to the micro level and deal with it on a very personal basis. Chan's decided to do it at the personal basis, and I think that it works very, very well. You get a better view of how it's impacting individuals like you and I, and by pitching a couple which were initially very, very compatible together, having completely different views of how they should go about this uploading to Gaia, it gives you a really good sense of psychological tension, but also the different options that are available to people and how they might move ahead with this. I think she made the right choice at doing it at this level because it certainly works for me. And as a debut work, Grace Chan's produced a novel of depth here. I mean, there's a few things that here and there I thought, okay, but it's a debut novel. And I think she's done very, very well. It asks a lot of questions about the value and impact of technological change and how we as individuals are going to react and what we're going to do when others around us are doing something completely different. Are we going to consider ourselves Are we going to consider ourselves to be truly human if everybody is in the virtual world? And what happens to the Earth and what happens to everything when everybody goes? This is a very engaging piece of work, and I was impressed with it. So, and I gave it 4.0 out of 5, David. Yeah, I think that if she'd been probably and maybe I'm being a bit harsh on that. It's as I said, it's an engaging piece of work, and I think it's an important Australian SF novel, and it deals with some questions that it sets up very, very well indeed, very well indeed.
Oh, and it's well to keep an eye on then.
Oh, I should also say that the one thing about it is that Melbourne-based SF critic Ian Mond pointed out is that it deals with that part of the singularity, not in terms of an apocalypse. There's not this big fight between the people in the singularity, the people outside it. The people that have been uploaded can't understand why the people that are outside haven't uploaded, and the people on the outside basically say, well, I don't want to go there. I just don't want to go there. And there's no apocalypse. There's no big, massive fight between the robots and the machinery on one side and the humans on the other. This is just a gradual change in terms of the way individuals see where their futures lie. And it's may sound as though it's not really compelling, but I thought it was. I thought it was an excellent piece of work. Really enjoyed it.
Does sound good. Does sound good. All right. Well, this is a bit of a change of pace from that. I'm going to be talking about Act of Oblivion by Robert Harris. Now, this is a novel of historical fiction. It's based very solidly on a true story, which is the travails of two men, Colonel Edward Whaley and his son-in-law, Colonel William Gough, Goffe. And the year is 1660. And Oliver Cromwell has just died after leading a revolution, replacing the monarchy with a Commonwealth and ruling England as Lord Protector. Oliver Cromwell has just died. When he died, he left the protectorate in the hands of his son, Richard Cromwell, who turned out to be a total failure as a national leader. And Parliament restored the monarchy in the form of Charles II. And, of course, this leaves the problem of the fact that many of the people who were on Cromwell's side in the Parliament and in the bureaucracy and so on, who had supported the Puritan cause, now they're having to deal with the fact that there's a whole new regime in place, literally a new regime in place in the form of Charles II. And so they're sort of being looked at fairly critically by the new regime. So Parliament passes a law called the Act of Oblivion, which essentially wipes the slate clean for all these people who were involved with the Puritan cause during the Civil War, except all of the people who were involved with the actual the trial and death of Charles I, the execution of Charles I, who were called the regicides, the ones who killed the king. So the people who signed his death warrant, the people who presided at his trial and execution, are never to be forgiven. And indeed, they're going to be, when they're caught, they're going to be subject to the traitor's death, gruesome traitor's death of being hung, drawn and quartered. Let me tell you, you don't want to look up the details of what actually happens when someone is hung, drawn and quartered. It is not nice.
Nasty stuff.
Indeed. Anyway, so fanatical are the new royalists that even Oliver Cromwell's body is exhumed from his grave and hung, and his head removed and put on a spike. So, anyway, the novel proper opens with the return to his home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, of someone called Daniel Gookins, Gookins, Gookins. He's long been awaited by his wife and young family. He's been in England. To her surprise, however, he brings two men with him who he met on board the ship. And these two men are Edward Whaley and William Goff, who received enough warning to flee the country before they were apprehended. And at first, in America, they tried to keep their identities secret, but on an ill-advised visit to Boston, someone recognises them and they're hounded back to the Gookins house in Cambridge, and eventually they have to leave there too because people are sort of coming for them. Now, all of this and almost all of what follows in the novel is apparently true history, thoroughly researched. But the author cleverly introduces a fictional character, Richard Naylor, who becomes obsessed for personal reasons in tracking down the regicides. And he's accounted for many on his long list of the regicides, but a number of them remain, including Whaley and Goff, who we can't work out where they are. And Naylor's obsession and his search for these two men adds a great deal of drive to the plot of the novel. So I thought this was a fascinating and moving account of the long drawn-out suffering of these two men as they moved from place to place, further and further away from the major English colonies in the US. Well, not in the US, of course, it wasn't the US then, in America, always fearing pursuit. They spent a couple of years living in a cave in the hills, trapping fish and small animals. But after their discovery there, they flee even further west. Several times they do find Puritan communities who will hide them for a time, but when the English government, prompted in the novel by Richard Naylor, offers a reward of £100 each for the capture of Whaley and Goff, dead or alive, they have to assume that their temptation of this huge sum will be more than many people can resist. And there's a lot of very interesting stuff about the relationship between these two men who have forced together. I mean, yes, they're related because William Goff is married to Whaley's daughter. But nevertheless, they're forced into this very close contact for years, literally years at a time, sometimes literally living in a basement while they're being hidden for months and months and months, sometimes years. Now, the younger man, William Goff, is deeply religious, almost fanatically so, Puritan. And this piousness sometimes drives into sort of extremes of believing that there's been a revelation or that the second coming is about to happen. And he tends to therefore expose the pair to great danger by kind of getting back into communities and declaring what he believes. But as the years pass, the older man, Ned Whaley, begins to write an account of his life, which and he had been very close to Oliver Cromwell. In fact, had grown up with Oliver Cromwell. And so this account that he writes gives us a real insight into what Cromwell must have been really like and the twists and turns of Cromwell's leadership during and after the Civil War. So I really enjoyed this. Robert Harris is great at writing these sort of historical fiction stories. There's a number of them I haven't actually read so far, but I would like to get hold of. He wrote a terrific one about Pompeii during the eruption of Vesuvius. It was a great, really, really interesting book. Anyway, to get back to this book, this is very well done because it seems to be, as I say, largely accurate based on the historical record. And the author gives a long list of the references he's used at the end of this book. There's like 3 or 4 pages of all the books he's consulted. But he's turned it into an excellent piece of fiction. And even if the fictional parts of it are invented, even leaving those aside, it's just a terrific story to read. Yeah, another one, highly recommended.
Okay, yep. Those guys would have been in a bit of trouble because there's practically nowhere to go.
Well, that's right. There was only a few colonies there.
Well, the colony of the North America was still under the sway of the king. France had yet to throw off the yoke of the aristocracy, so couldn't really go there because they would probably be picked up and sent back. Well, maybe they could have lasted in France because, the French still hated the English and the English hated the French. And
a number of the regicides fled to Holland.
Okay.
And because it was a Protestant country and very much against the English because they were fighting wars with the English at the time. But they were tracked down too. There were very few of them actually survived in Europe before they were caught.
I would have
assassinated.
Oh yes, I would have thought this was about to say. I would have thought that Charles II would have introduced a program rather along the lines of a certain current Russian leader. Who will rid me of this troublesome priest? Which is what I mentioned to my wife the other day with the Wagner leader having his plane pushed out a window. The Kremlin and Putin can basically come out and sort of say, well, we had nothing to do with it. But knowing the West and everybody else knows full well that you cross those guys and your days are numbered.
Absolutely.
If you start going down a particular path, then you've really just got to keep going and just hope for the best that you get to the end because he stepped over a line. The Wagner chief stepped over a line and then took a step back, and it was the step back that did him in.
As they say, if you come for the king, you better not miss.
Yes, absolutely. If you miss, you're in deep, deep trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll go back to here we are, jumping from the sublime to something a little bit very different, jumping backwards and forwards around all over the place. I've got another. It's interesting. This one, it's an SF novel. I think it's a sort of an SF novel, but. Well, let me just tell you, the name of the book is The Migration by Helen Marshall from 2019. Now, this novel was on the ballot of the 2020 British Fantasy Award in 2 categories, as Best Fantasy Novel and Best Horror Novel. Now, I can understand it being, you can think of it as being a horror novel, but I don't find it horrific. But I can't see at all that you could, anything at all that you could call this a fantasy novel. It does not fit my definition of anything to do with fantasy at all. So anyway, let me tell you what it's all about, then we can discuss as to where the boundaries of all these genres are, David, if you like. So it's set around about now, a little bit in the future. Storms and flooding spread across the northern hemisphere of the world. A strange new plague or disease is starting to infect young children on the verge of puberty. Now, Kira, K-I-R-I-R-A, is the younger sister of our narrator protagonist, Sophie. And Kira is diagnosed about the age of 12 with this particular disease, which is an immunosuppressant disease of some sort, while they're living in Toronto. Now, not finding anybody in Canada that's able to help them, the 2 sisters, along with their mother, moved to England to live with their aunt in Oxford. The mother and the father are sort of estranged a bit, and the breakup doesn't seem to be too onerous, and the father is really sort of forgotten over here a bit, which I thought was a bit... Anyway, that didn't quite hold true to me all that well, but anyway. Now, as the the disease progresses, Kira becomes more and more erratic and difficult to control. This is a young adult novel where we're seeing, the difficulties of puberty and interacting with the rest of the world. Another question. Now, news starts to spread of some of the victims of this particular disease starting to display post-mortem movements, the so-called Lazarus effect, namely that the body is pronounced dead, there's no brain activity at all, but there's shimmers in the body and legs start moving and twitching. And the authorities start to get a little bit worried about this. And so as the disease is starting to spread rather quickly, they order the creation of all the victims, all the dead victims of this particular disease. But after Kira appears to deliberately drown herself in a raging river, the two of them are out walking one day, and there's with the storms and flooding going on, Kira sort of lets go of her sister's hand, runs towards the edge of the river, and appears to fall in, is pulled out of the river down the track and is drowned. But it appears, from what Sophie thinks, that Kira actually set out to kill herself. Doesn't know why this has happened, but is not convinced that she's convinced that something else is going on here that the authorities don't want to have anything to do with. Kira starts displaying, this again, the post-mortem movements, and it's decided that she's put into the morgue and is tagged for cremation. Sophie's not very impressed with this idea because she's certain that something's going on and that she doesn't really like the idea. So she sets out to steal the body of her sister from the morgue and takes it and abandons it in a building not far from where she lives. She does this by basically borrowing her aunt's car and crashes it on the way back and ends up in hospital herself, only to be diagnosed with exactly the same immunodisease that has killed her sister. But she's a bit further down the track. She's now about 18 and has passed most of the changes that would occur during puberty. So her progression of her disease is a lot slower than what it was with her sister. Now, this is really a story of the power of love between sisters and family in a time of deep distress. But in many ways it reads like a standard YA novel. Upper school? Were you calling them upper school novels?
Upper school? Well, yes.
Yeah, sort of.
YA is a separate thing, I think.
16 to 18, upper high school
sort of
stuff.
That, yeah.
Because our main character, our narrator, is around 17 for most of the period of time that this book is running. And most of the main characters, all the way right through, are undergoing physical and psychological changes during their teenage years. Yet, like all good novels in such categories, they don't really fit within set boundaries at all. And, you shouldn't really be looking at this and dismissing it as being, it's just a YA novel because it's got young protagonists. No, this really should be read by anybody. And I would think that it should be. It's a very interesting exposition of what might have happened to the human evolution. There are hints that what is happening at this point has happened previously at the time of the plague, when there was a particular disease that caused deaths with great rapidity. But there seem to be examples of bodies moving after death at that time as well. Well, at least that's the point that's put across in this particular book. So we're looking at different path of evolution. There's hints that during the gestation period, the human body inside the mother's womb can follow one of two particular paths, and mostly it follows the path that we're used to down the human line, and that maybe this is the one that goes off on the other line. It's a very interesting. Yeah, I found it interesting. I don't know whether it's completely successful in everything that it attempts to do, but it's certainly worth a read and certainly is handled very well by this author who I'd never read anything by previously. I gave it 3.8 out of 5. Yeah, so I thought I think that I'd like to hear your view of it, David, because you've read
it looked very
more in
interesting
this upper school sort of level, and it'd be interesting to see whether you see that it fits. Now, I can see that. Well, I'll give you a bit of a hint that when Kira is kept in this particular abandoned building, the body doesn't decompose, but it starts to change. And what ends up happening is the whole of the body starts building an outer crusty shell.
No, don't give too much away.
No, I won't. That's as far as it'll go. So it starts undergoing a metamorphosis. And it's interesting from that perspective that it strikes me that I don't see any fantastic element here at all. I mean, it's a
science fictional element.
Yeah, it's a science fictional element, and you could basically say, well, somebody in one of the reviews I looked at compared it a bit to Stephen King's Pet Cemetery, which, as you recall, is this cemetery with sort of fantastical powers that when you bury your pet in this particular cemetery, it comes back, but it doesn't come back in a very nice. It comes back rather nasty. In this instance, that's not the case. Things are not down to that level, and I wouldn't relate it to Pet Cemetery from that. And I can understand that you would see that because of this metamorphosis of the bodies that are being undertaken, that it could be looked at as a horror novel, but I can't see it as a fantasy novel at all. I just don't get it. Somebody had a very weird particular view of this novel if they thought it was a fantasy.
Yeah. Well, I will read it. As soon as I saw it on your list, I looked it up online and I thought, oh, that's intriguing. So I got myself an ebook version.
Straight away. So I didn't even have to convince you, but now...
No, you didn't have to convince me. Just the name and as I looked up online, and it looked very interesting. So yeah, I will be reading that one.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Now, well, I'm going to talk about All Systems Red by Martha Wells. Now, Perry's going to be very annoyed with me about this because he's been nagging me, and several of my friends, Kerry Hanfield and Rob Duran, several people have been nagging me for years to try out this series, the Murderbot series by Martha Wells, of which this is the first book. Fantastic amount of awards that the series has won. This first book won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards for Best Novella in 2018. And the following novellas, many of them have won awards, and then a novel, Network Effect, which won the Hugo for Best Novel in 2021. And the whole series, in fact, won the Hugo for Best Series in 2021. And there are more coming, I understand. So everybody thinks it's terrific, but I didn't. Now, I remember first trying this out in an ebook version, which I got from my library, and at that stage I just couldn't get into it, and it went back. You had to go back to the library. So, but I saw it just recently available as a free, in quotes, audiobook from Audible.com, who sell audiobooks, and they're part of Amazon. And I decided to give it another try. It was only free in the sense that it comes, with an Audible subscription, which I'm trying out at the moment. Anyway, I just found this very disappointing. I'm not the least bit tempted to go on and read the rest of the series. So let me say why. And I should point out that actually, after writing a little review like this and sharing it with a friend, Henry Gasco, he reminded me that he'd previously written a review of the book and sent me a copy of it. We were in sync in terms of the things we were critical about. So I thought that was very interesting. Anyway, so let's look at the story. It's all told from the first-person point of view of a security unit, or sec unit, which appears to be a hybrid of robot and organic being. So it's kind of a cyborg, I suppose. It carries powerful weaponry and is employed or hired out for security purposes. It calls itself a murderbot, and although it doesn't do a lot of murdering. So Murderbot has somehow managed to hack and deactivate its governor module, which means that it now has free will and is not subject to the control of its employer or the people who have hired it. So with no restraints, it could go on a murdering rampage. But no, it prefers, it says, to watch the endless hours of human soap operas it's downloaded. And I like this little quote. As a heartless killing machine, I was a terrible failure. So look, it's a sort of faintly humorous premise, and that's, yeah, fine, okay. But there's no explanation, there's no convincing explanation, I thought, of why Murderbot was able to do this, but all of the hundreds of other security units which exist haven't been able to do the same. There's some sort of hand-wavy stuff about a defective upgrade patch or something, but again, we're supposed to believe that this is the only security unit in the universe which got that particular defective patch. Anyway, in this particular story, the first story, Murderbot's been hired by a small team of humans belonging to the Preservation Orcs group, who are surveying a planet for its resources. As the story opens, Murderbot's busily fighting off a vicious monster which has erupted from a crater, and is trying to kill off the members of this team. But the problem with this is the only time we ever encountered such beasts in the story, so it's just like a throwaway plot item. Just, you get this sucked in by this action at the start, and then you never see this creature again. Anyway, Murderbot gets his humans back to safety, although it's badly damaged itself. But so there are, I think, 5 or 6. I honestly couldn't tell you whether there are 5 or 6 humans in this team, because other than the team leader, Dr. Mensa, I found them all indistinguishable, no depth, completely flat characters. It's as though they were robots themselves. So this lack of characterization was the first thing I didn't like about it. Anyway, so this has happened. Then the team debates why warnings about this vicious native fauna aren't shown in the package that they've obtained from the company, which leased them the exploration license. And we get some sort of sense of deliberate sabotage. Not long later, we discover that that communications from another rival survey party on the planet have ceased. This team, Deltfall, is much larger than their own, and until recently, they've been very friendly and been responding to calls from the Preservation Orcs team. So, because the communications have lapsed, the Preservation Orcs team head off to see what's gone on, and they take the Sec Unit Murderbot with them. And they discover that every one of the humans at the Deltfall site has been violently murdered, apparently by rogue Sec units. We eventually discover that there's the third survey team on the planet, and we quickly find out that they are the bad guys in the story. So bad that they're prepared to carry out gruesome mass murders of the other teams to gain some sort of commercial advantage. But I wasn't at all convinced that there was even a need by these bad guys to kill off the others, and there's no convincing explanation as to why anyone would be this cold-blooded or why they would take a risk like that. Perhaps they're just really dumb bad guys, something which is reinforced later, I must say. So that was strike 2. And the Preservation Orcs team managed to leave their own base before the bad guys arrived to kill them all, and then what they need to do is to send up a distress beacon in order to be rescued. But oh no, the bad guys have destroyed the Preservation Orcs beacon. Oh no. So then there's a bit of, I thought was very simple sort of trickery by Murderbot and Dr. Mensa. And bam, bang, before you can blink, the bad guys are defeated, beacon's launched, the team's rescued, the bad guys are in jail, everyone lives happily ever after, goodbye. The action's over before it begins. It's just like a very, very poor handling of tension and climax in my view. So that was strike 3. So didn't like it, only gave it 3 stars. Can't see why I'd ever be bothered with the rest of the series. Okay, now convince me otherwise. Convince me otherwise, Perry.
Well, I don't think I'm going to be able to convince you otherwise. My major point about this whole thing was the character of the Murderbot. I just thought it was sort of a refreshing way to look at somebody who, or something, because it is, as you say, a cyborg. It's half flesh, half metal. Who really doesn't like human beings very much, but has to put up with them. And the way that it actually sort of convinces itself that it has to go and help them when it really doesn't want to, if it could avoid it. It would rather just sit there and watch soap operas 24 hours a day.
Which makes him a total slacker. That was the point.
Yeah, I know, but that's the whole point. That's what I
made.
liked about it. That's the whole thing, you know. This thing isn't sort of...
It's not an admirable character.
No, it's not. But that's the whole point. It's not an admirable character, but the point is, it's not... The character's not black or white. It's not one thing or the other. It realises it should do this, but doesn't really want to, but does it because it feels as though that's its job. And it would rather be doing something else. So it's very human from that perspective. But it's also very robotic from the other perspective in terms of the way it can go about doing its killing. No, I just thought it was a refreshing piece of fiction that I enjoyed.
That's fine.
I'm sorry
that's
you
fine.
didn't.
No, that's fine.
I mean, not all of them have been
I
up
gave
to,
it a good go.
Yeah, fair enough. Not all of them have been up to the high standard of that first one that I thought.
Oh, the high standard of the first one. Did it worse?
I thought it was good. I gave it well
Oh,
over 4.
goodness
I
me.
can't remember
Well,
what I
I'm
gave
definitely
it.
not reading anymore.
But you're not reading anymore. No, that's fine. That's okay. We are allowed to disagree on some of these things.
Absolutely.
I think that you're fairly deluded in terms of the way you've got about criticising this, and you're not seeing. Look. There's always possibilities of being to pick holes in plots.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to be critical, I agree.
No, that's okay. But I think that, and it's. I just felt that. It was a light-hearted breath of fresh air in terms of a cyborg. I mean, if you look at it and you think of the Terminator, I mean, that thing's just bloody relentless, and it's only got one thing on its mind, and it just does it. Well, this Murderbot, it's got a lot of things on its mind. It really wants to be over there watching episode 135 of season 4 of, the Light of the Silver Moon, or whatever it's watching.
The series is called, yeah.
Whatever the series is called, and it's continually going backwards and forwards and wanting to get there, and always talking about how it prefers the interactions of the soap opera personnel people to the real world people, because they're just a lot more. They just enjoys it a lot more. I just liked it. It just hit my point that's exactly right. It just hit the point where I felt that it was, as I said, just a new way of looking at an old trope, and you're always looking for some of those things, and it was in many ways a classic science fiction scenario, twisted just a bit over to one side, which I thought was really enjoyable. But there we go.
That's fine. Okay, jolly good.
Right,
okay.
okay.
Let's roll on.
Right, let's roll on. Okay, so I'm now going to be talking about a couple of films, although I think you've got another book to come.
Oh, yeah, I'll talk about a book in the middle of your
that's right,
films,
because you don't watch many films these days, because
hardly anything.
Well, on streaming services you can put the subtitles on, and I must admit I'm finding myself having to put subtitles on quite a lot more often these days, purely because sometimes I'm listening to the soundtrack and there's stuff in the background which pops up on the subtitles, and I thought, hang on, and I've rewound it and gone back, I don't get that.
You can't hear it.
I can't, there's nothing there. But anyway, that's interesting. So I'm doing a lot of watching things with subtitles all the time now, because sometimes the characters are just talking far too quickly or at too low a pitch for me to be able to hear. There we go. Anyway, the movie that I want to talk about here is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. You've obviously seen the first 2 of these, David, and know all about
I saw the first one.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I think that what you've done of the 3, you've seen the best of the 3.
Oh, okay.
Now, each of the previous episodes in this Marvel Cinematic Universe sequence of films have probably been the most, well, I refer to it as family-orientated of all the Marvel films. And by that, I don't mean that it's pitched purely and simply at the whole family like Disney-fied. No, it's more a matter of the actual themes within the films themselves, that they're all basically around the idea of family. Now, in the very first episode of this, Chris Pratt's character, Peter Quill, was abducted by Earth by alien space pirates on the day his mother died. What a great setup that is. And he was then forced to build his family from the fellow pirates. Yeah, so that's all right. That's fine with that. Gets to the age of his mid-20s, and then things start falling apart. And then he has to build what he feels is another surrogate family around him. So he picks up Bradley Cooper's Rocket. That's the sort of the raccoon-like character. The sentient tree Groot, who's played by Vin Diesel, who's basically his only line is, I am Groot, except at one occasion one film he says, "We are Groot," and everybody goes, "Ooh, that's a bit different," which is really good. Dave Bautista's Drax, who's just just got one mind in terms of where he is, and everything's completely literal about what he hears and what he does. And Zoe Zalander's Gamora. Now, Gamora is one of the daughters of Thanos. For those that are keeping track or not, Thanos was the one that did the big universe clean up by killing half of the life across the whole of the universe in the end of the sequence where the big Avengers Endgame and whatever the other one was called played out. So she's his daughter, adopted daughter. In the second film of this, Quill discovers that his father is an all-powerful celestial who abandoned his mother, the one that dies in the first film. So Quill has to work his way through all his father issues. There's a hell of a lot of father issues in the Marvel movies when you think about them. Thor and Loki have got one big massive father issue, which I guess you can understand, given that Odin is sort of all-powerful, all-seeing, supreme being of the universe. It's a bit hard not to have a father issue there. Iron Man's got father issues. He's got. They've all got family issues. Black Widow's finally found a family with the Avengers that she can she can trust after being ripped away from her family in Russia and trained to be an assassin. So most of the Marvel movies are about families to one degree, but I just think that the Guardians of the Galaxy ones sort of have it more upfront all the way right through. Now, along the way, the Guardians add Mantis and Karen Gillan's Nebula to the group. Nebula is another one of Thanos' daughters, and Karen Gillan, of course, played Amy Pond in the Doctor Who series, that lovely sequence of Matt Smith and River Song. I thought they were absolutely fantastic. And when we get here to the third episode, finally getting to this particular film, the third episode of Guardians of the Galaxy, we're told of Rocket's backstory. So this tells how he became what he is, this sort of sentient, speaking, physically and psychologically abused raccoon that's now a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So we learn how Rocket, as much as Quill, has become the centre of the strange assortment of beings that comprise the Guardians. This is a very sentimental film, and it plays on hits all the sentimental pieces as much as it possibly can, with everybody pulling on all the emotional strands they can find. But that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. This is certainly a better film than the second, though probably not to the level of the first, and that may be because the first was such a breath of fresh air. I'm talking breath of fresh air again, David. But
in that case, I see it. Yeah,
it really is in a situation where when you get all of those, when you got all of those films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it was all done in a certain way. And you're getting there, and then you see Guardians of the Galaxy, which is not a comic that I ever recall having been reading back in the 80s or wherever it was then, when it first came out. Suddenly you've got this idea that, Peter Quill, who's likes to call himself Star-Lord, but nobody else calls him that because he's just trying to pump himself up all the time, basically isn't as good as he thinks he is. He's pretty good, but he's not as good as he thinks he is. And he's got a lot of issues that he has to try and work his way through, far more than just about anybody else. And the motley assortment of people that he gets around him for whatever reason ends up, was just made it very light and funny. I thought the second film in this particular sequence was a bit stodgy, didn't sort of push along terribly much. This one's, as I said, better than the second, probably, and not as good as the first. Happens. But there you go. So I gave this one 3.8. I thought it was still good, and I would still recommend people watch it. Do you have to see the second one? Probably. You'd certainly have to see the first one. I would suggest that you see all three if you're going to watch this one. So I don't know what number this one is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Number 27, 28, 30. I don't know. There's a bucket loads of them all over the place. And if you wanted to if you want to try and keep up, you've got a lot of work to do.
No way. Right. Well, from a modern, up-to-date science fiction movie, I'm going to go back in time, because it could just about have done this in the Hugo time machine.
Yeah.
I'm going back 100 years to talk about The Moon Maid by Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Oh, God.
Whoa. Now, the only reason I actually read this was that I did it as a production for Standard eBooks, who I've talked about in the past on the podcast. And I've been working on a very major, hard job, which is going to take me years yet, which is James Boswell's Life of Samuel Johnson. And
it'll kill you, David. It'll kill you.
It will kill me. I think you're right. Every so often I just look for something to give me a bit of light relief. And I spotted the fact that we hadn't done The Moon Maid. We'd done quite a few of the other Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. So I thought I'd do this. So anyway, to the actual book itself, The Moon Maid is actually a compilation of 3 novellas, which are linked by a framing story. We've talked about these fix-ups in the past. There's a sort of framing story that binds them all together into one sort of novel. And the 3 original books were serialized in Argosy magazine. And they are The Moon Maid, which was published in early 1922, The Moon Men, late in 1922, and The Red Hawk, published in 1923. So, 100 years and a bit ago. Now, the core concept, I suppose that's actually a pun, I hadn't thought of that. The core concept of the first part of the book spins off from Burroughs' earlier novels, At the Earth's Core, there you go, and right. Pellucidar.
God, that was a bit of a strain.
It was a strain. In which it's discovered that the Earth is in fact hollow. Yes,
of course it is.
It doesn't have a solid
Doesn't everybody
interior.
know that?
It's hollow, and it's lit by an internal sun, and has a variety of inhabitants, including intelligent gorillas and highly intelligent pterodactyls. Go figure. So that's those 2 books. In fact, there's a whole series of Pellucidar novels, but they're the first 2 books of that series. Anyway, this is a different series. So in The Moon Maid, a voyage sets off from Earth to travel to Mars, but there's sabotage carried out by one of the crew, and they're forced to land on the moon itself instead. The landscape of the moon is, of course, inhospitable, but eventually the ship travels into a crater and down into the depths of the moon. Down, 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 and lo and behold, it's discovered that the moon too is hollow inside.
Yes.
And that within, yes. And that within its shell it has a breathable atmosphere and its own inhabitants. And much entertaining do goes on as our hero is captured by evil cannibal centaurs and has to help free a beautiful human princess, the Moon Maid of the title. Now, so that's the first novella. In the second part of the book, a malevolent race of moon men, the Kalakars, have, just now that they know the Earth exists, have invaded the Earth and imposed a totalitarian regime. Now, interestingly, apparently this book was originally going to be about communist invaders from Russia before being rewritten as a work of pure science fiction. So anyway, the Kalakars have invaded the Earth. We have to wait for the third part of the book, where the Red Hawk, the leader of a group of kind of Native American equivalents, is able to lead his troops to attack the Kalakars and drive them out. It was quite readable, I thought. It's certainly on a par with his other science fiction novels like A Princess of Mars and The Land That Time Forgot and the Tarzan novels. So it's readable for 12-year-olds, at least. But I couldn't go past this. I've got to quote this because it's excruciating. It's hilariously excruciating stuff to do with what Burroughs considers romance. So I'm going to quote. So this is the Moon Maid, the princess of the moon. "I have brought you only suffering and danger, and now death, Julian," she said, "when you deserve naught but happiness and peace." I suddenly felt very strange, and my heart behaved wretchedly, so that when I attempted to speak, it pounded so that I could say nothing, and my knees shook beneath me. This is a guy who's been killing off centaurs and things. What had come over me? Then at last I managed to gather myself together. "Ni-i-la," sorry, this is the name of the princess. "Ni-i-la," I said. "I do not fear death if you must die, and I do not seek happiness except with you." She looked up suddenly, her great tear-dimmed eyes wide and gazing deep into mine. You mean, Julian? You mean? I can't read this without laughing. You mean, Julian? You mean? I mean, la, that I love you, I replied, though I must have stumbled through the words in a most ridiculous manner, so frightened was I. Ah, Julian, she sighed, and put her arms about my neck. And you, Neela? I exclaimed incredulously as I crushed her to me. Can it be that you return my love? Oh, God. It's just so bad. Oh, well, anyway, so look, I can't recommend you read this book unless you want to be a Burroughs completist. But look, it wasn't all that bad on its own terms for a 100-year-old work of pulp science fiction. It was okay.
Very.
Skip the romance bits.
Oh, yeah, well, very definitely as a 12-year-old you would have skipped that.
Yeah.
Here comes all the sticky kissing
stuff.
Let's get through that and get the other. So you probably wouldn't have read it as a 12-year-old. You would have skimmed over and thought, well, this is a really great story, you know. And somebody brings up the romance bits. What are they? Missed all that. Yeah. And for good reason, by the sound of things.
Yeah. Anyway, there we go.
Well, I wasn't what Edgar Rice Bubbles, as we used to refer to him, was never one that I read as a kid. Just didn't.
Oh, you missed out so much. I read all the Tarzan books when I was a kid.
Just didn't find them because I grew up in a small country town. They didn't have them, so you know, just nobody ever mentioned it to me. So there we go. Part of my education that
Can't say you really missed a lot. No.
Oh my God, I can't believe I've got to have to go back and relive my life, David. Just go back and read the stuff.
No.
Okay, so let's go from the ridiculous to the sublime in this instance, and talk about probably the major film that's come out this year, Barbieheimer. Oh, no, sorry, I mean Oppenheimer. I haven't actually seen Barbie. My wife has and said it was really good. She really, really enjoyed it. She said it was great. And, well, sometimes my wife and I disagree over films. I think that she's probably right. But she came to see Oppenheimer with me and really, really enjoyed this as well. So she's one of the few people I know that have seen the two of them and enjoyed the two films. But it's interesting they came out on the same day. But, you know.
She's the only connection between them.
Yeah, that's right. But that's the fun bit about it. You know, people have been able to say, look, they are so completely and utterly different. There's no way that you can get them apart. Of course, all the right wingers in the US are all up in arms about Barbie, you know, being a overly feminist film with, you know, sort of basically putting down Ken left, right, and centre. Well, okay, come on, it's just a movie. Move on. Anyway, Oppenheimer. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, of course, most people would know a fair bit about it already. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan. Now, we've discussed some Christopher Nolan films here in the past, specifically Interstellar at one point, which we both struggled with. So Christopher Nolan can be a very hit and miss filmmaker for me. When he's on song, he's good, but, you know, when he misses, like within Interstellar, it can be a real disappointment. But luckily, he's hit a very high point here, and maybe he'll soon come to the realisation that he's probably better keeping things at a character-driven work level rather than making grandiose attempts at exploring huge themes that run out of control. I mean, I thought Interstellar was almost his attempt to redo 2001, but it just did not work. Now, while I say this is a small character-driven film, this isn't a small film by any stretch of the imagination. It covers a hell of a lot of themes and is handled really, really well. Now, most of us would know of Oppenheimer's role in the World War II US program called the Manhattan Project, the aim of which was to develop the atomic bomb, which was used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of the Second World War. But I guess few of us would be aware of the way in which his reputation was shredded, torn apart during the Cold War period of the 1950s. So here we're coming back to what you were talking about earlier on.
Yeah.
He had a sort of flirtation with the Communist Party back in the 1920s. He'd been in Germany during the early part of the 1920s when he started to get an interest in quantum mechanics. And all the quantum mechanics work at that stage was being done in Europe, either by Germans or by the Danes in terms of Niels Bohr. But basically anybody who was anybody in the early 1920s was all there in in Germany. Planck, Heisenberg, Einstein, all of them were there doing all of that work. Now, they all were, well, most of them were Jewish, and so they basically all got forced out when the Nazis started to come in. But they had all flirted to one degree or another with the Communist Party, because they saw the Communist Party as being the only bulwark against the fascists. If you recall, there was the Spanish Civil War, where we had Franco's forces, the ones that were ultimately successful on one side, who were backed by the fascists, Mussolini and Hitler, and on the other side, where all the Western countries stayed out of it, and the only ones that were backing them were the communists from the Soviet Union. And so if you backed the anti-Franco forces, the anti-fascist forces, you're considered to be a communist. Oppenheimer used to send his money through to support the Spanish cause, and it had to be funneled through the Communist Party, because there was no other way to get the money there, because nobody else in the West was helping out. And so because you were giving money to an anti-fascist cause that happened to pass through the hands of the Communist Party, the people in the McCarthy area considered that you were a communist.
Mm-hmm.
So what Nolan's done with this is he realised that there are two completely separate stories running here. There's the major one of Oppenheimer's development all the way up through quantum mechanics, where he turns up back in the US, and he's the only one that's talking about it, until he builds up a whole bunch of people around him who are working on that particular part of physics. So he has all that as one stream, which is all in colour, and then he has the other stream, which comes in later after the Second World War, where Oppenheimer's patriotism and his security clearance are being questioned by particular people inside the US government, and that's all filmed in black and white. And so you get these two interesting streams that work with and against each other, but they're overlapping. So you get a long sequence of colour, and then it will jump over to the black and white. So you know when you're making the transition. And the interesting thing about, of course, with his choice in terms of colour on one side and black and white on the other, is that the medium that he's presenting it in gives you the idea about what's happening. So in the early parts of this, where he's developing all these ideas and theories about quantum mechanics and building up for this new world that they're trying to build, everything's all in colour. When you move to the 1950s and he's in strife with the McCarthy area, and everybody is either saying, you're either on our side or you're on their side, everything's black and white, and so is the medium in which he's filming it, which is interesting. Now, maybe I'm sort of reading too much into that, but I thought that was, and while it was obvious, I thought it was well done, and it wasn't, anyway. But Nolan's basically chosen a really good way of telling this particular story, because the two of them sort of go hand in hand. You're getting two different parts of Oppenheimer. You're seeing him as a young idealist, but he's a man. He makes mistakes. He has an affair with somebody and almost ruins his marriage. He rubs people up the wrong way, but he gets the job done in the end that practically nobody else would have been able to do, because he understands what's needed to be done. Now, there's a number of people that have criticised this particular film by saying that it doesn't show what happened with Hiroshima and Hiroshima. Well, it's not a story about the dropping of the bomb. It's a story about the development of the bomb.
Yeah.
And really, the whole clue is given in the title of the film. It's called Oppenheimer. It's not called World War II. It's not called Japan or Nagasaki or Hiroshima. It's called Oppenheimer, and it's about him and about this whole particular work that he's doing, the moral and ethical questions that he has to tackle as he's doing this. That's all about what's happening with him, and that's the way that it should be. There's the point at one stage that he says, and I think it's in the trailer somewhere, where he says to somebody, I don't think we should be developing this. I don't think that we should be doing it. But I'm absolutely certain that the Nazis, it's going to be worse if they have it. If we don't have it and they have it, they'll use it. They'll use it everywhere. And he was perfectly correct. But anyway, he finds out later on that they were following a completely wrong path, that Oppenheimer's group had already gone down, realised it was wrong and changed direction. Now, the two lead roles here are played by Cillian Murphy, who was in Peaky Blinders and has been in a number of other Nolan films. He was in one of the early Batman films. He's perfect.
He was the Scarecrow, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's absolutely perfect in this role. Not only does he look
he looks like he was
Oppenheimer,
born to play that.
He looks like he's born to play the role. And, oh my God, if this guy does not win the Best Actor awards just about everywhere next year, something's really wrong. But I also want to give a shout out to Robert Downey Jr., who is, of course, better known as Stark from Iron Man, from the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, but he's finished with all that. And he plays the jealous and vindictive Lewis Strauss, who was snubbed on one occasion by Oppenheimer in a congressional hearing and vowed to basically bring him down. And that's what he sets out to do. Look, this is the best work that I've seen Downey Jr. do. I think this is a vindication of Nolan's work as a filmmaker. A lot of people have said that you should go and see it on the IMAX. I don't know. A lot of people say, well, you go and see it for the explosions, but it's like a 2-hour 50 movie. I mean, it is a long film. It's a very long film. But let me tell you, I got down at the end and I thought, oh, right, okay, it's finished. Looked at, cockers, we've been here that long. Didn't realise it'd been there that long at all. It holds your interest all the way through. And the idea that it cuts from one time stream to another is a really good way of doing it, because you're going to get some points where it's going to be a bit flat after, you get to a certain part where something's happened in one stream and he cuts away from that and goes something over to here. So he's always got a next dramatic piece of tension building up to it. And that works really, really well with this. This is certainly a film that you're going to have to see, David, even if it is on a streaming service, wherever it comes
I really want to see. I really want to see this one.
You will have to have it with subtitles. I mean, it is a very, very loud film. Some of the music, some of the noises in the first 5 to 10 minutes, I thought, God, if this thing keeps on going like this, I'm going to be deaf by the end of it. But it settles down, so it's very loud from that perspective at the start. But it's also an excellent piece of work. And if this is one of those films that you'd have to say that I'd put down and say, look, if you're interested in film at all, if you're interested in the history of that part of history, then I suggest you go and watch it. There's a lot of interesting little cameos of people cropping up here and there, all the ones where Nolan has used previously. Kenneth Branagh's in this. You'll see a whole lot of other people. He plays Niels Bohr. You see a lot of other people that are sort of popping up. Didn't see Michael Caine, though. He's in every one of them. Probably somebody will tell me, no, he was doing the voiceover of the loudspeaker or something like that. I don't know, but I didn't see him there, which I was disappointed in. I got to the end and said, I didn't see Michael Caine. So very disappointing. But there were, other than that, 4.5 out of 5, David, and the more I think about it, it's slowly starting to creep up a little bit on
a bit more, isn't it?
Higher. It might be a bit more than that, but it is certainly going to be one of the best films I've seen this year.
Yeah, and there's no question I want to see it, but yeah, I'll probably need to wait for it to come onto a streaming service somewhere or on a DVD or something. We'll see.
Track it down. Whatever you can do, try and track it down somewhere, and put it in as one of those things. Forget about what he's done in the past in terms of Interstellar, if that was if that disappointed you. Go and see this with a new set of eyes, and go in without. Try and go in and just let it wash over the top of you. just let the whole thing just go, and then sit back and then try and work out what he's done and how he's done it. And he's done a very, very good job. Very good job.
Excellent.
Right.
All right. Well, certainly look forward to that.
All right. Well, I think we're done.
I think we've been going for a while. We better stop.
Yeah, I think we had. Yeah, we've been rabbiting on way too long, but then
way too long today. Just under an hour and a half. All right. So we'll wind up and we'll talk about.
We'll be back in
next
hopefully
week.
3 weeks, unless something untoward happens. And I'm hoping that next time we can start talking a bit about crime fiction, David. It's been a little while.
I've got a couple of crime things lined up, and I've got something else I'm about to read, I think so.
All right, that's good. Well, we'll see everybody in our next episode, David.
Yeah, see you then.
All right, okay. See you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.